Kellogg presents a plan to divide Ukraine. Steve Witkoff spent almost 5 hours alone with Putin. Should we expect a new dose of Russian propaganda from Donald Trump's special representative, Witkoff? And also, what awaits and what is the future? Agreements on rare earth metals and minerals? Spoiler, why is it still important for us to sign it? About this and more right now, friends. Welcome to my channel. I am Alexander Musienko, and this is the traditional briefing for you of those events that I consider relevant, important, and worthy of your esteemed attention. So, what's happening? Well, first of all, it is known that recently the President of the USA, Donald Trump, just at the moment when Steve Witkoff, his special representative, flew to Russia, which was later acknowledged by the White House, then of course that we saw Witkoff on video right in St. Petersburg, where he was received by Putin. This was preceded by a post from Donald Trump on the social network Truth Social, where he wrote that there is no need for Russia to hurry, and his demand, this time it was actually the first time when Trump called on Russia and Putin to start moving, literally to move, as the process had slowed down. Thank you. And it was to him that Trump appealed, demanding a truce, effectively giving a deadline until the end of April of the month. In other words, a date has already been set. In fact, it's a kind of light, easy ultimatum from Trump to Putin. You could call it exactly that. After this information appeared in the publication The Axios. It may be less popular than many other American publications, but it is characterized by having quite informed sources that share relevant information. So, having received the relevant data from there, it became known that the Trump administration is now really seriously considering a new option of imposing sanctions against Russia, against the Kremlin, in case Putin continues to delay. Well, what kind of sanctions? To make them directly, these sanctions are tougher. This preceded Witkoff's trip. Witkoff went and he had meetings with Kirill Dmitriev, Putin's special representative. Also on issues concerning Ukraine. By the way, some people are starting to call Dmitriev almost Putin's successor. It happens that people from Ukraine help support the Russian Empire. Unfortunately, this has historically been the case for us, and Russia would prefer it to remain that way. Well, because Dmitriev, who was born in Kiev, who studied directly in the USA, and regarding Dmitriev's father, by the way, there was information spread by some Azerbaijani publications that his father currently resides in Kiev. There was such information, I don't know how true it is. This was spread by the publication Minaval Daz, that is an Azerbaijani site, an information agency. So they met, discussed, then 4.5 hours of dialogue with Putin. It is clear that obviously there was another portion of a lecture about Russia, about history, about Ukraine, and much more. That is, well, such a colossal amount of information that Witkoff received. A portion for reflection. For a new interview with Tucker Carlson, probably. Where will he be to relay all this? And so, for now, there are no significant details. I think there won't be any until Witkoff returns to the USA, until they analyze all this, until there is a report to the President of the USA, Trump. And after that, Trump himself might make a statement on his social media, and we will find out about it, hear about it, and what was decided and discussed there. Meanwhile, what was discussed and what is gaining momentum now is an exclusive from the Times of London, where there is essentially the Kellogg plan, General Kellogg, who is the special representative of the US President for Ukraine, and who is proposing an alternative. That is, Witkoff adheres to an approach, and the media write about it, including Reuters, and not only them. And here, by the way, I caution you, don't rush to immediately trust publications too quickly, especially those based on Russian sources, after Vitkov met with Putin. Because these very Russian sources could be provocations by Russian special services, their talking points, their narratives, which they may now consciously spread through Western media, in order to create a backdrop, well, to already fill the informational agenda with the information they deem necessary to convey. About what has been agreed upon there now, something about the US and Russia already making progress on issues. There. What the peace agreement should be like and so on. That is, there can be many different kinds of these leaks now. We need to wait. It is not excluded that these statements from Russian sources might be confirmed somewhere, unfortunately for us. But we should not immediately trust and take it at face value. We need to wait until there is more specificity after Trump's statements. Only then we will be able to analyze it, which I will definitely do for you. And to stay updated, please subscribe to my channel, leave your likes, and write comments. This is very important for our community to grow and for Ukrainian content on YouTube to progress. So, let's move on to General Keith Kellogg's plan, which he wrote for the Times of London. What does General Keith Kellogg propose? He proposes that France and Britain, under the leadership of France and Britain, form a coalition of the willing with military contingents from European countries, possibly not only European, but under their leadership. Specifically, Britain and France, London and Paris, would be stationed in the western and central regions of Ukraine, essentially throughout the entire right bank Ukraine, along the Kyiv-Odessa line along the Dnipro, and accordingly, the entire west. Foreign troops should be stationed there as security guarantors. Together, of course, with the armed forces of Ukraine, with units of the defense forces of Ukraine. Next, what is proposed is the left bank. The map is drawn in such a way that part of the Ukrainian territory remains under Russian occupation. It practically duplicates the map that was once presented by the former aide to the Russian dictator Putin, Vladislav Surkov, only without Odessa. That is, it shows that the regions currently occupied by Russia, without Zaporizhzhia and without Kherson. Without Zaporizhzhia, meaning Zaporizhzhia and Kherson, remain under Ukrainian control, and Odessa. Similarly, all the territory that is currently occupied, it comes under Russian control. Plus, an 18-mile demilitarized zone is created, which must remain demilitarized. This means the presence of both Russian and Ukrainian, and especially Western European troops, is excluded there. This is how it is envisioned. This is what they propose. Accordingly, of course, under such conditions, in fact, part of the demilitarized zone practically approaches Zaporizhzhia, for example, or Kherson. Well, that's how it basically looks right now. This is the situation. This is how it is envisioned. This is how it is proposed by Western partners. In principle, Kellogg, by and large, proposes to fix the status quo and essentially just distribute responsibility. Kellogg begins to outline the details of how the coalition of the willing might operate. What could it be? So where should foreign troops be stationed? Then, well, in the center and west of our country. Of course, we would like it to be, as The Economist wrote, Dnipro, Kryvyi Rih, Poltava, certainly. And I would really like that. Moreover, I would like American troops to join. And I believe that someday American bases will indeed appear on the territory of Ukraine as a guarantee of our security. I sincerely hope for this. But Shana, as the man himself notes, Europeans need to think, act more actively and decisively. From the point of view of supporting Ukraine and guaranteeing security for the coming years, now is not the time to look only towards Washington. After all, US President Donald Trump has made it clear that it will not be like before and that Europe must pay more, Europe must finance, Europe must increase weapons production and be ready to contribute to providing truly effective security guarantees for Ukraine. And Kellogg clearly states that things will not be as they were before. Thus, this is the plan. It was called the division plan. Perhaps someone, and General Kellogg has already refuted it, he said that the Times misunderstood his words. Well, of course, one can backtrack, make a certain informational leak, and test the reaction. We know how this is done. And then say, no, that's not what I meant, my words were misinterpreted. The content was completely misrepresented, and generally. Say, I meant something completely different, but here, this is how it was perceived, and it was presented in this context. That's what it's about. But in the grand scheme of things, it's about the division of spheres of influence, zones of influence, specifically of military contingents, administrations. And analogies were simply drawn with Germany. This is not very pleasant, of course. This is unpleasant. And in addition, when such maps are drawn, undoubtedly for us, Ukrainians, they can evoke unpleasant memories, retrospectives, about how maps were drawn for us, of various kinds, starting from the times of 2004 up to the Orange Revolution, which ultimately led to and was one of the prerequisites for the Orange Revolution, because Ukrainians did not want to be divided into different sorts for Russia to draw some maps for us somewhere. But as of today, these are the realities that they are trying to show. A peace. And he talks about how there will be spheres of influence, a zone of control, a question for the coalition of the willing. The coalition of the willing continues to meet. This week there was another meeting. Before this, last week, there were visits from the chiefs of staff of the British and French armies. Practically every week, in one capital or another, in one city or another, it takes place. A meeting of those who are ready to send their troops to Ukraine. Relevant negotiations are being conducted, but so far we do not hear the details. Perhaps Kellogg has just begun to reveal these details. And perhaps, yes, not everyone likes it. Not everyone will be pleased when we see a detailed plan of how our Western European partners envision the possibility of deploying their troops on the territory of Ukraine, and not everyone will be thrilled about it. Unfortunately, this also needs to be understood. But this is how it might look. Kellogg distanced himself. He saw the wave of hate, obviously doesn't want it to progress further, and basically said that, well, that's not what he meant. But here it is. And Vitkov, his competitor, offers a different plan. Vitkov suggests that Ukraine should completely withdraw from Zaporizhzhia and Kherson. And Kellogg does not propose this, by the way. In any case, because he clearly understands that Ukraine will never agree to this and will not do it, and there is voluntary pressure on Kherson and Zaporizhzhia, Russia cannot take them by military means. Yes, where in world history has it been seen that one would simply leave territories that are not even occupied by the enemy or adversary, or they are not even close to implementing this occupation plan? Of course, that will not happen, and Kellogg understands this, and that's why he proposes such an alternative as it looks and might look now. This is at least what our partners are discussing, and we need to understand this and reflect on it. Meanwhile, we see that the Reuters reports that negotiations are ongoing with the participation of the Ukrainian delegation, which just this week traveled to the USA and is conducting talks at a more technical level regarding the parameters of a future agreement on rare earth metals and minerals between Ukraine and the USA, supposedly ended very complicatedly, and is not nearing finalization. That is, there are obstacles, there are barriers that currently prevent us from saying that this agreement is close to being signed. And this is where the problem lies. We must proceed from the fact, and by the way, Kellogg is a supporter of having this agreement ratified by the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, as very aptly and correctly proposed by the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. Indeed. In order to achieve public consensus and to demonstrate to our partners the readiness and commitment to fulfill the agreements and obligations that will ultimately be reached in the final version of this agreement, this is absolutely correct. These are steps in the right direction. But, Todi, there are no agreements on the final text yet. And according to the New York Times, Donald Trump, they will demand that Ukraine repay the debts for the weapons supplied to us. This is what the US president mentioned, that this issue remains valid. And essentially for future shipments. Ukraine is not against future ones. The president of Ukraine absolutely correctly and clearly stated, what do we need? Another 10 Patriot-type air defense systems. But we are ready to buy them. It's not just that they should be given to us, we are ready to pay for them in one form or another. And this is very correct. But strategically, it is important for Ukraine to maintain the alliance with the United States, even at the cost of having to pay. The choice will be such that we need to achieve unity no matter what and build the state. And it will have to be done. Some funds will have to be paid in the future for armaments, joint extraction and so on. Of natural resources, 50-50 funds as the states propose. But the main thing is not to allow the Russian world. Because if the Russian world is allowed, then of course, Ukraine will definitely have no other chance but to rot, in the swamp of the Russian Empire and be used in the war against the West. But this way we have certain chances. Now let's look at Trump's reaction. To all of this, to the reaction of the coalition of the willing, I will continue to keep you informed. And despite everything, take care of yourselves and glory to Ukraine.